The Dead Three, also known as the Dark Three or the Dark Gods, is the title given to three deities: Bane, the Lord of Darkness, Bhaal, the Lord of Murder, and Myrkul, the Lord of Bones. They were three mortals who slew powerful primordials, fought their way through hordes of undead, and then were apotheosized by Jergal, the Netheril god of death and the dead. Their story of ascension is told in the legend of Knucklebones, Skull Bowling, and the Empty Throne. Quote, "Long ago, there was but one god of strife, death, and the dead, and he was known as Jergal, Lord of the End of Everything. Jergal fomented and fed on the discord among mortals and deific entities alike. When beings slew each other in their quest for power or in their hatred, he welcomed them into his shadowy kingdom of eternal gloom. As all things died, everything came to him eventually. And over time, he built a kingdom unchallenged by any other god. But he grew tired of his duties, for he knew them too well. And without challenge, there is nothing. And in nothingness, there is only gloom. In such a state, the difference between absolute power and absolute powerlessness is undetectable. During this dark era arose three powerful mortals, Bane, Bhaal, and Myrkul, who lusted after the power Jergal possessed. The trio forged an unholy pact that they would gain such ultimate power or die in the attempt. Over the length and breadth of the world they strode, seeking powerful magic and spells and defying death at every turn. No matter what monster they confronted or what spells they braved, the three mortals emerged unscathed at every turn. Eventually, the trio journeyed into the Grey Waste and sought out the Castle of Bone. Through armies of skeletons, legions of zombies, hordes of wraiths, and a gauntlet of liches they battled. Eventually, they reached the object of their lifelong quest, the Bone Throne. "I claim this throne of evil," Bane the Tyrant shouted to Jergal. "I'll destroy you before you can raise a finger," threatened Bhaal the Assassin. "And I shall imprison your essence for eternity," promised Myrkul the Necromancer. Jergal arose from his throne with a weary expression and said, "The throne is yours. I have grown weary of this empty power. Take it if you wish. I promise to serve and guide you as your seneschal until you grow comfortable with the position." Then, before the stunned trio could react, the Lord of the Dead asked, "Who among you shall rule?" The trio immediately fell to fighting among themselves, while Jergal looked on with indifference. When eventually it appeared that either they would all die of exhaustion or battle on for an eternity, the Lord of the End of Everything intervened. "After all you have sacrificed, would you come away with nothing? Why don't you divide the portfolios of the office by engaging in a game of skill for them?" asked Jergal. Bane, Bhaal, and Myrkul considered the god's offer and agreed to it. So Jergal took the skulls of his three most powerful liches and gave them to the trio so that they could compete in skull bowling. Each mortal rolled a skull across the Grey Waste, having agreed that the winner would be he who bowled the farthest. Malar the Beast Lord arrived to visit Jergal at this moment. After quickly ascertaining that the winner of the contest would receive all of Jergal's power, he chased off after the three skulls to make sure that the contest would be halted until he had a chance to participate for part of the prize. Bane, Bhaal, and Myrkul again fell to fighting, as it was obvious their sport had been ruined, but again Jergal intervened. "Why don't you allow Lady Luck to decide, so you don't have to share with the beast?" The trio agreed to this alternative, and Jergal broke off his skeletal finger bones and gave them to the contestants. When Malar returned from chasing the skulls, he found that the trio had just finished a game of Knucklebones. Bane cried out triumphantly, "As winner, I choose to rule for all eternity as the ultimate tyrant. I can induce hatred and strife at my whim, and all will bow down before me while in my kingdom." Myrkul, who had won second place, declared, "But I choose the dead, and by doing so I truly win, because all that you are lord over, Bane, will eventually be mine. All things must die, even gods." Bhaal, who finished third, proclaimed, "I choose death, and it is by my hand that all that you rule, Lord Bane, will eventually pass to Lord Myrkul. Both of you must pay honor to me and obey my wishes, since I can destroy your kingdom, Bane, by murdering your subjects, and I can starve your kingdom, Myrkul, by staying my hand." Malar growled in frustration, but could do nothing, and so yet again, only the beasts were left for him. And Jergal merely smiled, for he had been delivered. End quote. That's the story that gets told, and it is a good story. But how did they really ascend to godhood? I mean, surely there's details missing, more to their adventure. And did Jergal really give up his entire divine portfolio simply because he was bored? Well, let's dive into it. Now, before I get into this video, real quick, I want to point out that my main source of information is the DM's Guild book, Lord of the End of Everything by Eric Boyd. Since it's on the DM's Guild, it is a third-party book and not technically official canon, but the writer Eric Boyd has written many official Forgotten Realms lore books, such as Faiths and Avatars, Demi-Human Deities, and Faiths and Pantheons. He is a brilliant world builder and does a fantastic job at filling in the blanks and weaving in pieces of lore from official work, as opposed to just retconning stuff. The work that he, Ed Greenwood, George Krashos, and others write on the DM's Guild is going to be more detailed and, in my opinion, better than anything Wizards of the Coast puts out, so I am considering it Forgotten Realms canon. Also, Ed Greenwood, the creator of the Forgotten Realms, also endorses it. Anyways, let's get back to the Dead 3. The Dead 3's origins begin, like many things on Faerun, with Netheril. In case you don't know, Netheril was an ancient human civilization led by extremely powerful spellcasters called Arcanists. It collapsed in -339 in an event called Karsus's Folly, where the Arcanist Karsus attempted to steal the divinity of the goddess of magic, Mistral, in order to become powerful enough to defeat the Faerun, which were basically magic-sucking tube socks that were destroying their civilization. When people think of Netheril, they usually think of Karsus, the Great Liches of Omvor, Iulam, and Larlock, and the ruler of the Shade Enclave, Telemont Tanthul. But the crowned sorcerers of Rdiuz were probably just as significant in their arcane might and potential to destroy their own empire. Rdiuz was a Netherese enclave that claimed the plains between the Scimitar Spires and the Desert's Mouth Mountains, and was ruled by one sorcerer queen and 6 sorcerer kings. Their names were Cathala Akri, whose nickname was Cat, Glaros Larum, Jathamin Arthopar, Meg and Zarath, Morden Terashane, Urax Rasendal, and Urgund Mezeketh. They considered themselves equal to gods, so Cathala built a gate, called the Cat's Gate, in the Godswater Ravine that led to the Outlands. With this, they conquered a section of the Outlands, and then Meg built a fortress, also called Meg, around a 2-way color portal to the astral plane, where they could then study the corpses of gods. After stealing a fragment of a god's corpse in -489, they invoked the ire of Anubis, the guardian of dead gods, who sent an army of Rilmani to recover the remains. Rilmani are creatures native to the Outlands that embody the alignment of pure neutrality. They usually resembled featureless humanoids, although in 5th edition they look more like constructs, but the Rilmani that Anubis sent took the form of jackal-headed warriors. The citadel of Meg on the Outlands was destroyed, and the Rilmani began pouring through the Cat's Gate into Netheril in -483. They shut off the gate, but in -475, Anubis made a new one in the modern-day Colored Waters in the Anarok Desert, and began sieging Rdiuz in what is called the Seven Sigils War. To turn the tides of the war, 2 of the Sorcerer Kings, Morden and Urax, consulted the second MS Arcana, a magical gauntlet that held Emisscari lore on battling the gods, the Emisscari being another ancient human civilization that were really good at creating portals to other worlds. They discovered an Emisscari experiment that summoned 2 primordials in the wilds north of the Moon Sea, Borum of the Lake of Boiling Mud and Camnod the Unseen. In -449, they went to the Monument of the Ancients, a ziggurat in the western stretch of the Frozen Forest that holds the Anchor of Chaos, which kept the elemental chaos and primordials from bleeding into Toril, and is probably how the Emisscari summoned those primordials. They intentionally damaged the Anchor of Chaos, releasing a 3rd primordial known as Merum of the Great Spear. They bound the primordial with Netherese magic, and Merum then brought forth an army of elemental creatures and slaves that marched south and west to attack the Rilmani armies. One of these slaves summoned by Merum was a warrior who was so skilled in combat, he was known as the Bane of the Ancients on a beer, but you probably just know him as Bane. While Morden and Urax recruited Merim, Jathaman focused on creating a way to kill gods, both to kill Anubis and for their planned conquest of the plains. By studying the fragment of the dead god, he deduced how divine beings must be slain. Each crown sorcerer founded a cult among the population of Rdiuz that worshipped them. In -439, they used this emerging worship, the sacrifice of dozens of cultists, and the power of the fragments of the dead god they had obtained to create the god-killing 7 daggers of Rdiuz. It was at this point that Jergal, the Netherese god of the dead, intervened. See, Jergal used to be a spellweaver, a magically powerful race that had a multiverse-spanning civilization that experimented on and studied other creatures. In -3939, they attempted a ritual to turn every spellweaver into a god, called the Ascension Ritual, but it failed, causing all of their settlements to be destroyed in an event called the Disjunction. Jergal was one of the few surviving spellweavers and was born the moment of the Disjunction. While the Ascension Ritual failed, it did manage to bestow a spark of divinity into Jergal the moment he was born. Although he was a god, he was still aging normally for a spellweaver and eventually neared the end of his 36th century life, so he attempted another ritual of ascension, one that would give him a new form by being reborn as 6 gods, which would use the bodies of 6 Netherese mortals, the focal point of which was Karsus. He would eventually manipulate Karsus and the others into performing the ritual for him, although they believed it would allow Karsus to claim Mistral's portfolio, causing Karsus's folly in -339, but it ultimately failed due to the intervention of the Terraseer, a Saruk Lich who was pissed off at Jergal, and Jergal was reduced to a small sliver of a divine being and put back on a 3600-year death clock. After Netheril's fall, his divinity fragmented into rival sects. Anyways, back to -439, Jergal was worried that the crown sorcerers might interfere with his revised ascension ritual, so he slew all their cultists, turning them into ghouls, and stole the 7 daggers of Rdiuz. The sorcerer king Glaros began reconstructing the shattered scepter of Imiskar, which is how the Imiskari created the divine barrier that blocked the Mulani gods from Toril, and began calling it the Scepter of the Sorcerer Kings. But he was killed by the minions of the Netherese Pantheon before he could finish, and the scepter was stolen by the sorcerer king Urgund. The remaining crown sorcerers of Rdiuz realized their plans were in ruin and gave the fragments of the dead god back to Anubis as part of a peace deal in -371. They banished the elementals in their service, but Merim of the Great Spear escaped and returned to the Monument of the Ancients. Now, at this point you might be thinking, wow, this is really cool, but what the hell does it have to do with the Dead Three? Well, we're getting there. As I mentioned earlier, one of the slave warriors Merim summoned was known as the Bane of Ancients on Abir, eventually coming to be known simply as Bane. Abir is the twin world of Toril, existing in the same space as Toril but in a pocket dimension. When Ao sundered Abir Toril, Toril was given to the gods and Abir to the primordials. Since he was known on Abir, this seems to imply Bane was originally from there and then enslaved by Merim. This isn't really important, I just find it interesting that Bane is from Abir. Anyways, Bane was tasked with spying on Romani forces, working alongside the chief assassin and spy master of the crown sorcerers known as Erebal, although you probably know him as just Bhaal. The two eventually formed an alliance based on mutual respect of their skills and ruthlessness. Jergal is a being of unending schemes and contingencies, and decided to manipulate Bane and Bhaal into his servants in case he ever needed them. He also viewed the 3 primordials, Borum of the Lake of Boiling Mud, Kamnod the Unseen, and Merim of the Great Spear, as potential threats to his revised Ascension ritual. So, he began sending visions in the form of nightmares to Bane and Bhaal that revealed the location of the 7 daggers of Rdiuz, and showed them using the daggers to slay the 3 primordials. They followed the clues to a small island that the crown sorcerer Urgund Mezeketh, who is now a lich, had fled to, on the modern-day Mezeketh Isle off the coast of Serloon. There, they met Myrkul Bey al-Kursi, crown prince of Murgam, who left his home to find power that being a prince could not provide. The 3 teamed up and would later become known as the Dark Three. Notice I didn't say Dead Three. That name comes later when they are killed during the Time of Troubles. For most of their history, they were known as the Dark Three. Anyways, they killed Urgund, who would eventually become Bane's first Bane Lich, ruined his magical tower called Mezeketh, And then Myrkul claimed the Scepter of the Sorcerer Kings, Bane claimed Urgun's Phylactery, and Bhaal claimed the Jathaman Dagger, one of the 7 daggers of Rdiuz. They then went to the realm of the Topaz Dragon Kisonrathizar, which stretched from the Lake of the Long Arm to the Giant's Run Mountains. Arriving in his court of Auclorum, which is modern-day Westgate, they asked for safe passage in exchange for slaying Borum of the Lake of Boiling Mud and taking his heart away. Since being summoned by the Emissari long ago, Borum had taken the form of a muddy river, called the River Reza, and very recently had become active, flooding the river into a boiling lake in what is now known as Redwater Lake. The dragon accepted their request, and they traveled through the fields of Rezamark, which is what the area around the lake was called, as the land spouted geysers of steaming mud to stop them. They breached his home plane and then killed him with the Jathaman Dagger, absorbing a portion of his power. They then sailed north to Mezeketh Isle and buried Borum's Quagheart beneath the ruins of the Tower of Mezeketh with the Jathaman Dagger embedded in it, and then marked the location with a carved menhir with the following Jemdathan inscription. Quote, "In those days, we 3 sought power, prestige, and eternal persistence. The plains had opened up to us, revealing their terrible secrets. On the fields of fetid Rezamark, in the lake of boiling mud, we took a step away from mortality. Borum, patron of anger, breathes no more. His indestructible heart is buried on this forlorn rock, where it must rest for eternity. We shall keep watch over it forever." End quote. Following Jergal's visions, they recovered the Morden dagger in the ruins of Mithrin in the Wheeldath, then used it to slay Camnod the Unseen in the windswept plains of the Ride, who had tricked the horse nomads of the Golden Steppes into worshipping him as a wind god, although historical records only show one tribe of these horse nomads, called the Vayguld, worshipping any primordials. They absorbed his power and buried his heart with the Morden dagger embedded in it beneath the tallest peak of the Zeph Mountains at the western end of the Ride. Jergal then revealed to them the location of the Urax dagger, but they decided to pursue Merim of the Great Spear without it. Merim had also posed as a god to the horse nomads of the Golden Steppes, and in -357, the Dark Three recruited an army to follow Merim's trail and kill him. The army consisted of an alliance between the Wizards of Bars, Bars being a kingdom founded by the Netherese Arcanist of the same name, who was fleeing persecution from the Negarath Enclave, Artificers from Horeb, another kingdom south of Bars, the Horse Nomads of Varm, one of the tribes of the Horse Nomads of the Golden Steppes located in the Ride, the Knoll Warriors of Flindyke, the Goliath Hunters of Mount Akoro, and the Gnome Hammers of Forharn. They fought their way to the Monument of the Ancients, where Myrkul banished Merim back to the elemental plane of Earth with the Scepter of the Sorcerer Kings. With this, Bane resealed the Anchor of Chaos with a Horeb ritual cube, and all 3 seized a portion of Merim's power. While they were successful, this resulted in tremendous losses for the armies, where only 1 for each 25 soldiers returned home. Jergal returned his focus on his revised Ascension ritual, and the Dark Three became obsessed with becoming gods themselves. The Dark Three stayed behind at the Monument of the Ancients, telling their superiors they were studying the Anchor of Chaos to prevent future primordial incursions, but truthfully, they were attempting to release additional primordials to steal their power. In the lands of Li Wai, known today as the Tortured Lands, Myrkul constructed the Cenotaph of Lost Gods to hold the Dark Three's obtained divine power. He then inscribed the name of the 7 primordials, now referred to as the 7 Lost Gods, they had mastered or planned on mastering: Borum of the Lake of Boiling Mud, Camnod the Unseen, Idranka of the Smoldering Haze, Hargut of the Grey Pestilence, Merim of the Great Spear, Torath of the Obsidian Vault, and Tyrant Thraxus the Flamed One. They attempted to summon Hargut, but he had fled to the Far Realm and escaped the Anchor long ago. However, he had one worshipper on Toril, a great horned minotaur known as Hask, who led the kingdom of Gronghap from Ironfang Keep. In -356, they then successfully summoned Tyrant Thraxus, Idranka, and Torath, extracting portions of their power and binding them to their wills. Then, in a ploy to force Hask to summon Hargut to Toril so that they could absorb his power as well, they unleashed Tyrant Thraxus, Idranka, and Torath on the realms, invoking 6 years of turmoil in the area north of the Moon Sea. Tyrant Thraxus, leading an army of Fomorians, destroyed the kingdom of Bars and attacked the Varm tribe in the Horeb kingdom before being imprisoned in a vial of water at the bottom of Lake Longreach by the last Horeb artificer. Torath was commanded to lead a Kuatoa army to conquer Dwagar settlements in the area beneath modern-day Mulemaster before being lured into an icy lake by a coven of hags, turning him into a pillar of rock, known as the Pillar of Fire. And Idranka led a horde of goblin tribes from the Tortured Lands against the kingdom of Grunghap, where Hask, the worshipper of Hargut, ruled from. In response to this colossal threat, Hask summoned Hargut to destroy Idranka in -350, just as the Dark Three had planned. When Hask returned triumphantly to his keep, Bane and Myrkul were nonchalantly sitting on his giant crafted throne, and Bhaal appeared behind the Priest King, driving the Urax dagger into his back and into his heart. As the dagger drained his life, his Minotaur guise fell, revealing his true form as a Batrachi doppelganger, Batrachi being the amphibian creator race that ruled a vast empire in the early histories of Toril. They then gave Hask an ultimatum. They would spare his life in exchange for his undying fealty and command of the Grey Pestilence. He accepted, and Myrkul used the Scepter of the Sorcerer Kings to bind Hask and Hargut into one being, Hask now existing as a symbiont attached to Hargut's flesh, and imprisoning him beneath Ironfang Keep. The Dark Three now had the fragments of power from all 7 primordials. If you want to learn more about these 7 lost gods, what they look like, and what they're up to now, I recently released a video just on them that gets into more depth, so you should check that out. With the Batrachi lore obtained from Hask, they discovered a Batrachi stronghold called Karikar in -349. It was located underneath the Glacier of the White Worm and contained the secret of a great portal nexus of Batrachi creation. This 3-point portal nexus was called Garut Omrum, and 10 years later in -339, they succeeded in reopening it. At the moment of Karsus' folly, the Weave's destruction unlocked the portal's Batrachi seal, causing 3 pyramids to emerge throughout Faerun. Garut R at the mouth of the river Stojanau, located in the modern-day Sorcerer's Isle in Flan, Garut A in the caverns beneath Ironfang Keep, and Garut Ku, covered by the ice of the Great Glacier, located in caverns beneath modern-day Vasa near Castle Perilous. They studied these portals, and in -335, drawing on the primordial power they had placed in the Cenotaph of the Lost Gods, they used the Garut Omrun to travel to Jergal's Court of Bone in Oinos, the second layer of Hades. Unknown to Myrkul, the Scepter of the Sorcerer Kings could not leave the material plane and was unintentionally left behind. They battled countless hordes of undead before arriving at the Bone Throne where Jergal waited. Before they could slay the god, Jergal offered his divine position to them and asked which one of them would take it. And you know the rest of the story. The trio argued with each other, Jergal had them bowl Lich Skulls, Malar chased after them, and then Jergal had them play Knucklebones. Bane placed first and chose to rule the living as a god of tyrants, starting with the 7 primordials. Myrkul placed second and chose to command Jergal and the dead, and Bhaal chose murder, balancing Myrkul and Bane's domains so he could control the transition between them. And so, Jergal surrendered much of his divinity to the Dark Three, supposedly because he was bored of his duties and lacked a challenge. But truthfully, this is just the start of his next plan to once again gain a new body before he dies in 3600 years. What exactly Jergal plans to do with the Dead Three and why he allowed them to become gods is unknown to everyone except the pitiless one himself. But I suspect it's because they're easy to control. Jergal knows exactly what they want: more power. Anytime the chance to gain more power shows up, the Dark Three scheme to obtain it. So, if Jergal needs something done, all he has to do is dangle the potential of more power before them, and they'll go in the exact direction he wants. Having people you can easily manipulate to perform your bidding is useful, and they're exponentially more useful if they are gods. And that is the story of how Bane, Bhaal, and Myrkul became gods. I plan on making another history video on the Dead Three soon that will cover everything they did after ascending all the way up to the current 5th edition time period. So make sure you look out for that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and remember to subscribe for more D&D lore.